The moose has to be the most iconic species in the Northeast. It's a symbol of the region's rugged wilderness and forests. And by any measure, the moose is a conservation success story, at one point nearly extirpated from the region. Today, tens of thousands roam New England, an incredible recovery. Unfortunately, a number of factors have led to a recent decline in population, leaving many wondering what the future holds for this giant creature. I'm Chris, by the way, and thank you for listening to the Conservation Cooperative, a production of the New England and New York chapters of Backcountry Hunters Anglers. So there's a ton of stuff going on right now in the world of conservation. Frankly, not much of it is good news. Heck, it's been so busy, it's impacted our ability to kick out new episodes. So the last thing I want to do with this story is set it up as more doom and gloom. It's not. If anything, as I put this one together, I was left feeling optimistic, not just about moose, but the future of conservation in the Northeast. We have some really good people in the conservation space, from state employees, university researchers, to everyday people who love wildlife and our wild places. I hope you walk away feeling the same way as I do when you hear from the folks we talk to in this episode. So let's do it. Let's start with some historical context. Before European colonization, moose were most likely widespread across New Hampshire, but not likely abundant, a function of the type of habitat that was available, which was mostly mature forest. During European colonization and into the 1800s, the forests of New Hampshire were largely cleared for livestock and crops. Along the way, moose were harvested for subsistence and the population steeply declined. By the mid-1800s, it's estimated there was little over a dozen moose left in the state. I'll let someone else take it from here.
My name is Henry Jones. I'm the Moose Project Leader for New Hampshire Fish and Game. From 1900 to 1950, the population was pretty minimal, pretty few moose. And then about 1950 and to 2000, New Hampshire's moose population increased rapidly. And that was due to multiple reasons. So one is the forests had regrown and they had reached a size where they were now merchantable. And so that resulted in logging that was creating an interspersion or a mosaic of young forest and older forest. So, good moose habitat has young forest for forage, live leaves and twigs. And then it also has older forest, preferably evergreen forest, as cover nearby. And so from 1950 to 2000, the forests had regrown and you started to have high quality moose habitat. Additionally, in northern New Hampshire and across northern New England and much of Maine, there was the spruce budworm outbreak in the 1970s that resulted in quite a bit of salvage harvesting of balsam fir. That also resulted in there being more young forest on the landscape, improved habitat as well. Additionally, during this time, hunting was minimal and predation is minimal in the Northeast. And so that moose population increased rapidly.
It sure did. So from about 15 moose at one point to a peak as high as 8,000 in the late 1990s, that's quite a comeback for a critter that can weigh over 1,000 pounds. Since that time, the population has been on the decline.
From 2000 to present, the moose population's been declining, and this varies. The cause of this varies by the part of the state that you're in. So in northern New Hampshire, north of the White Mountains, which is New Hampshire's core moose population, that's New Hampshire's best moose habitat and has the majority of the moose, about 2/3. That population's been declining due to winter tick parasitism. South of the White Mountains, that's peripheral moose range and habitat. And that population's been declining due to habitat reasons. So that is loss of habitat, fragmentation of habitat, as well as minimal young forest in certain areas or evergreen cover. Other reasons for the decline are winter tick and brainworm parasitism.
Before we dig a little deeper into those issues, it should be noted that the New Hampshire Fish and Game's moose management program launched in the 1980s and eventually led to the first moose hunt in 1988. For that first hunt, 75 permits were issued for northern New Hampshire. Since that time, the moose management program has grown, funded by license sales and revenue from the Wildlife Restoration Program through Pittman-Robertson Act funds.
Moose are managed for their aesthetic value and as a hunted big game animal, which is a balance. And they're typically managed under 10-year frameworks set in game management plans or big game management plans, of which there have been 5 to date. And the goals for moose management are typically to manage for a level of moose abundance that is biologically sustainable and socially acceptable when possible, to maintain a population that is in good physical condition with sufficient males and females, and to communicate about moose status with the public, with the residents of New Hampshire, and to conserve moose habitat. And I should also say over this time period, from 2000 to 2008, there were desires to reduce the moose population. And that was due to high moose vehicle collision rates, as well as concerns about moose browsing on commercially valuable trees, young commercially valuable trees. So as you can see, we'll be entering in, our next plan starts soon. It's the 2026 to 2035 plan that we just went through the process of updating and adopting this spring.
The management plan takes into account all the different pressures on the moose population that Henry touched on earlier. Things like winter tick infestations, brainworm, and habitat loss. But out of all of these, winter ticks are probably the trickiest to manage. Here's why. It's what's called a density-dependent issue. Basically, the more moose there are in an area, the worse the tick problem gets. It's a vicious cycle. Here's Henry to break it down a bit more.
Winter ticks are a problem for moose when you have moderate to high moose densities and winters are short. So being that New Hampshire is at the southern edge of moose range, and our moose population is moderate to high density in comparison to other moose populations across North America, it was likely that we were going to have winter tick issues. The average infestation on moose that died due to winter tick parasitism during research, that was about 47,000 ticks and went up to 92,000 ticks. So it's due to high numbers. And what that does is those ticks get on in the fall. They stay on all winter. And then in March and April, they're in adult stage and they take a large blood meal. For small moose, typically moose that are less than 1 year old, if they have a lot of ticks on them, they run out of fat and muscle trying to make energy to replace their blood. For older moose, they typically have enough fat and muscle to meet those added energy demands of the blood loss, but adult cows are in poorer condition and they're having fewer calves and calves less frequently. So this is a moose caused by high local moose density and then also short winters. And so what the short winters do is they give winter ticks more time to get on moose. So winter ticks are out questing, the larvae are questing on the vegetation, trying to find a host that brushes up against them approximately from September 1st until there's lasting snow. And so the longer it takes for lasting snow to show up, the more time they have to try to get on a host, get on a moose. And then once on a host, they survive, take blood, lay eggs, the cycle repeats.
Brainworm is a whole different story. Also known as meningeal worm, this parasite takes up residence in the meningeal tissue of the central nervous system, and that's where it does its damage. Now here's the interesting part. It's most commonly found in white-tailed deer, In fact, over 60% of the deer in New Hampshire likely carry it. But deer have developed resistance to it over time. Moose, though, not so much. So, wherever moose and deer share the same habitat, there's a real risk of infection for moose.
The life cycle is you have the adult worms in the meninges of the deer brain. They pass larvae that migrate into the bloodstream and then into the digestive system and are passed with feces in the deer pellets, deer feces. When snails and slugs crawl onto those deer feces, those brainworm larvae, the first stage, infect them, and they then develop into later stages of brainworm larvae that can be infective to moose and deer if they accidentally ingest the snails and slugs when they're eating. So that's how the cycle works. And so with brainworm and moose, you see more brainworm in moose when overlap of moose habitat and deer habitat is high, and that tends to occur when your deer abundance on the landscape increases. Moose exposure to brainworm also increases when you have longer, wetter growing seasons.
With the climate trends we've been seeing in recent years, which include less severe winters, resulting in higher deer survival, and longer and wetter growing seasons, which increase the opportunity for exposure in the first place, the rates of brainworm infection has become more common. The management options here are limited. Basically, minimize the overlap of the two species and possibly reduce deer density in those areas. Obviously, when we're considering overlap of the species, what we're talking about is habitat, which is another whole issue impacting moose abundance. We'll come back to that in a bit. A few years ago, the New England chapter of BHA decided to take action in support of moose conservation, aware that the species was facing significant challenges. Around that time, Heather Kuzmirez, a chapter board member and New Hampshire state lead, and I crossed paths with Dr. Remington Mull of the University of New Hampshire's Wildlife Modeling and Management Lab. We first heard him speak during a presentation to the New Hampshire Fish and Game Commission, where he shared insights from a camera trap study. The research shared that day primarily focused on moose and mesocarnivores. Mesocarnivores, by the way, are small to medium-sized mammals, consuming mostly meat. Things like coyotes, foxes, fishers, and martens. We made a pretty straightforward pitch. Let us help with the data collection. After all, hunters are no strangers to trail cameras. And that's how it started. Since then, the chapter has taken charge of several grids, basically clusters of cameras, mostly set up in the White Mountain region of the state. Here's BHA's New England chapter coordinator, Brian Bird, with more.
Yeah, so for the checks, we usually meet in the morning. There's been a couple times we've camped. So some of the folks that are helping us out were with us at camp. But generally, we meet at a certain location. All the cameras are plotted on as waypoints on Onyx. So we all kind of coordinate our Onyx and pick which ones we're going to go for, and then disperse from there. Typically a hike, depending on which cameras we're doing, the hikes are either relatively easy near the road or they're quite a distance in the backcountry with varying degrees of ease on getting there. And even though there is a waypoint, it's hard to find the camera. You can get close to where the waypoint is, and because the nature of the camouflage camera, it can be tough to find, but we find the camera, and then there's a whole procedure on how we basically take the cards out, change the batteries, check the settings, make sure the settings are appropriate for whichever season. We do move the camera based on winter and summer positions. The summer positions are usually lower, but we can't keep them there because in the wintertime, the snow would cover the camera.
Meet Jeff Swayze. He's a BHA member, mental health counselor, and fly fishing guide. He's a regular at our camera checks. I asked him why he keeps coming back.
Yeah, well, my primary interest was to start with selfish. I get to spend a day in the woods, primarily off trail, with other BHA folks. And I also saw some really good deer signs. So as a reactivated deer hunter, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm spending the day in the woods and I'm learning a lot about new areas. I thought I had knew a lot about areas in the White Mountains because the White Mountain National Forest had been my home for a long time, but I saw some really cool country. So that was first and foremost. But I would say also it's really important is just an opportunity to be a valuable part of providing data for managers that are going to make future decisions on how the moose population is managed. And I think that's really important from a conservation perspective. It's an iconic species in New Hampshire.
Here's Brian again.
I think just in general, BHA members are inclined to participate in activities like this, using, seeing the science, helping out where they can. Camping and hiking. That's kind of right up our alley. We enjoy doing that. Also, being able to see, it doesn't happen every single time, but if time permits, we can pull up the computer and check out what's on the card, and that just really gets people fired up. And just everything, it's because the camera triggers on anything that moves in front of it, including, which is kind of cool, to see some flying squirrels at night. That's always fun. So it's not just seeing the moose and the big bucks on there, but it's also just wildlife in general and seeing what the woods are doing. And I know personally I enjoy seeing that and being part of that. I think our volunteers do as well.
I asked another volunteer, AJ Hunter, why he gives his time to this project. He's a BHA member and small business owner. His company, Hunt Light, designs and manufactures hunting saddle and other gear. He's taking time away from his business during the work week to help Brian and I visit a few remote camera locations.
I don't consider this a day off. I think it's all part of it. It's not just about making hunting gear for me. I enjoy hunting, and if I can contribute and give back. I don't put in for the moose lottery because there's so few tags in New Hampshire, but this data all contributes and helps, and that's what it's all about for me.
The data really does make a difference. Take Lily Hall, for example, a recent UNH master's student who played a key role in helping our chapter collaborate with UNH's Wildlife Monitoring and Management Lab. This past spring, she presented at the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies conference, where she talked about using unoccupied aerial systems, or drones as most of us call them, to measure wildlife densities, specifically for moose. Over 2 months, she conducted more than 100 flights with a drone equipped with thermal imaging and found a moose density that didn't quite match what hunters had reported, a common source for estimating these numbers. But thanks to camera trap study running at the same time, which provides a different way to model population density, she was able to get a clearer picture of how effective drones can be for this kind of work. What's really cool is that's just one example of many as to what this camera trap data can be used for.
My name is Marie Poisson. I am a third-year PhD candidate at the University of New Hampshire. I've been at UNH I'm going on 5 years now. I started my master's at UNH in 2021, completed that in 2023. I was working with Dr. Remington Mall in the Wildlife Modeling and Management Lab and really enjoyed working with him, really enjoyed the research I was doing. So stayed on for a PhD, and now it's been 4 years. I study the impacts of human development on wildlife. I primarily use camera traps to gather data, and most of my research is focused in New Hampshire. Our lab is very collaborative with the students within our lab, but also with researchers at state agencies, other researchers at the university. So there are multiple students in my lab also using camera trap data. Andrew Butler is a PhD candidate. He's using camera trap data to understand fur bearer population dynamics within New Hampshire. We just had 3 master's students graduate. Lily Hall was studying moose demographics in New Hampshire. She was using camera trap data as well as drones. to see if drones are an effective way of measuring moose density. Sarah Richards just graduated. She finished her master's and was looking at deer ecology in Missouri using collar data and moose ecology in New Hampshire using camera trap data. Specifically, she was looking at cow calf and cow bull ratios. And then finally, Clara Dawson just finished her master's, and she was looking at areas of high road mortality, whether wildlife are using culverts in those areas, and if they are not, what parts of the road are they using, and which species are using culverts, which species are avoiding culverts. So, and I believe she published one of her chapters already. Really cool stuff.
Just like the New England chapter has done by supporting striped bass research, something we've covered in a past episode, the chapter is committed to backing research that can shape future management decisions, not just here in New England, but across the board. And there's no question that the UNH Modeling and Management Lab is doing exactly that with all of the incredible projects their student and faculty are tackling. Take Myri's work, for instance. It has the potential to make a real impact, not only on the day-to-day operations of New Hampshire Fish and Game, but also their long-term strategic planning. I'll let her tell you more about that.
New Hampshire Fish and Game has a really cool connectivity model for the state that uses mixed sources of data, including some limited species data, species distribution data or movement data, but a lot of it was sourced from expert opinion just because there isn't a lot of data available. We don't have a lot of colored animals in the state, and trying to gather all of that is very expensive. So in collaboration with Fish and Game, specifically, we've been working with Katie Callahan at Fish and Game. I have been trying to ground truth their connectivity model using our camera trap data. So using that camera data, I'm ground truthing the connectivity layers to see if they align with where we are seeing wildlife. Yeah, that is one chapter of my dissertation that is hopefully nearing an end. I think we're close to done with that one, and hopefully that can be of use to Fish and Game in publishing the new connectivity model with the State Wildlife Action Plan update.
A big part of Myri's work is looking at the relative abundance of species in distinct land cover types. Remember, there's 300 camera traps out there, over 250 of which are feeding into her study. To way oversimplify the design, the cameras are placed in different types of habitat and randomly distributed. So, as different types of critters are caught on camera across a wide range of areas with different conditions and proximity to different factors like human disturbance, for instance, skilled researchers can begin to gain valuable insights. But how do you use it all?
So, ideally, it would be great to have species-specific models. But then what's the application of that? How do towns put that to use? How do state land managers put that to use? If we're trying to manage for all of these different species that might have distinct connectivity needs, how do we put that into action? And I think there's ways to be very thoughtful about putting this into action, but there might be a way of incorporating these species-specific models, layering them together and seeing where there's the highest overlap. Or a different way of doing this would be to pick a species that has the broadest connectivity or that has the narrowest connectivity on the flip side, or the species of the absolute greatest conservation need, and focus on those and understand that, like, if there is more connectivity, that will benefit more species, even if it is for one species, focused on one species and not another. There will be certain amounts of overlap. So I think the managers in the state are very thoughtful and they consider the species that they're working with very deeply. So hopefully these tools, it's just another tool in their toolbox. and they can use them to build better models and to build better connectivity in the state for whatever species they're targeting.
I've had the chance to work with the students that are part of the Wildlife Modeling and Management Lab. And it's incredible to see the energy and curiosity flowing through the team. When I asked Myri about it, she pointed out something that's probably no surprise. It all starts at the top.
Especially when working with Rem, he's so enthusiastic and encouraging and excitable. So sometimes we definitely are like talking about one thing and we're like, oh, what if we explored this? And you start going on this tangent, and either that becomes a dissertation chapter or that becomes a side project, or you're like, you know what? No time for that. Got to veer back on course. We've had some of those. We've had ideas come up for other students that are related to their dissertation topics or just cool ideas they've been thinking about. And those have become lab papers that all of us work on together. It's a great opportunity to work on something that might not be fully related to your research, but is a curious question. And then we get to write a paper together, which is really fun.
The curiosity, the energy, and even the fun. That's what gives me hope for the future. Henry Jones told me that he still sees a future with moose in it, despite all of the challenges. But he also said it's going to take people who are engaged, who care about the species and the habitat. And you know what? When I step back from the politics, the policy debates, and all the noise and negativity on social media, I see people like Jeff and AJ, folks who are willing to give of their time and energy. Not for any benefit, but simply to give back to the wildlife and the wild places that feed their souls. Then there are people like Myri, smart, passionate, and driven, who represent the next generation of professionals, ready to step up and steward our natural resources. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to take work, real hands-on effort. But I know this, the BHA community isn't afraid to roll up their sleeves and get involved. We're ready to chip in and do what it takes. That is it for this one. As always, thank you for listening. You can support this podcast and all of the work that Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is doing on behalf of our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife by becoming a member and making a donation today. We'll be back with another episode in the near future. Until then, I hope you get outside, in the field, on the water. Take care.